I am your host Salim bin Mohammed Rafi, and here is my YouTube channel Zamir Universal. Every thing which goes up comes down, and unfortunately there is one person in the whole world at the moment called Bibi Natenyahu, a war criminal, one of the cruelest men on earth. If you rate him and put him on a survey, he will emerge as the cruelest man ever born on this earth, because the blood of all those innocent babies, the modesty of those babies, little girls, boys, raped, killed for their organs, and their mother, their sisters, their father, their grandfather, their places of worship, their hospitals, their electricity, their power, their water, their food, everything has been blocked. In other, the whole of their habitat, their houses flattened. Now, what kind of criminal a person can do? No human can do this thing. Even a pig who is a scavenger on this earth will not do this thing, small babies. And you must have seen many a time, then you see a wolf and you see a little fawn, a little baby deer, and or a cheetah playing with that and not killing or eating him. But Natenyahu is one devil beast who has been doing this thing. And look at the whole world on one side at this one man. Now I am going to give him a piece of history in this, and to show him that there have been much stronger people on earth before this adamant beast, war criminal, a known person with warrants of arrest out to arrest him, hang him by the neck till he breathes his last. And he is the one who, with his ill-gotten money by the Zionists, and he has become one of the ugliest and eager faces on earth, and he is ready to put the whole world on fire. And I will play a few clips just to prove my point, and we'll start with that. I'm sorry, that little portion of that, the Qome or the nation word is in another language, not in English, but I think you will understand those who, or could translate this thing to see for yourself. That's what's going to happen. And this is because America is supporting that. The only country on the world who is supporting this evil is the United States of America, with his 2 aircraft carriers out there, with all his destroyed surrounding Israel to protect Israel. Imagine, their greatest terrorist and evil is the United States of America, who is his stepfather. He gave birth to this Israel, and you can see the Harry Truman's word that we were looking for a place to accommodate them, and he puts his finger on his head that I picked up the Palestine, the easy way to give them bits and peace. And you can see how the Britain played dirty, how Americans played dirty in creating this, how the Zionist movement was tolerated and nobody took any action. And now you can see for yourself. It is almost, I think the next month will be 1 year in the Gaza war, and see what is left in Gaza war. Every day there are hundreds of Palestinian kids, women, children are either moved from one place to other like herd of animals, or they are killed and they are buried in the grave. He has no regard for his own people. You could see the Ben Gurion airport, and see how the people, and see the greatest exodus of Jews. See that the 180 kilometers all empty, all ghost cities, which should be now really taken over by, not even if Hamas, Houthis must go there, or the Taliban must go there, or Turk or Pakistan army must go there and take over the land. Land has to be exchanged with land. If you want Golan Heights, if you want the Philadelphia corridor, if you want Eilat, if you want Haifa, if you want Tel Aviv, you have to capture the land. It take 200 kilometers inside the land, and then you will see this bloody beast will come begging and will be licking your feet to beg for the ceasefire. Now, you can see he's mocking at the whole world, not Muslim world, the Christian world, anybody who is a human anywhere, and whether it's in China, it's in Russia, or in there, this one single person is spitting on the face of the whole world. So I think if the Israelis cannot take care of him, as they took care of Rabin, who wanted peace in Oslo Accord, there was one single man was required to get rid of him. And I am amazed that with so much opposition, so much people out suffering at the airport, in their homes, in their shelters, outside there, without their businesses, without anything, everything crashed there. Country completely going to be finished and demolished and destroyed. Not one single person can take care of this man. If you do that, you save the whole world from world war and the whole world from getting into fire.
On November 2nd, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter that would set off a conflict still being fought more than 100 years later.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object.
When Balfour wrote of his government's intent to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, 90% of the people living there were not Jewish. Just 31 years later, most of them were gone.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים.
This is the story of the British promise that led to the destruction of Palestine and the creation of the State of Israel. Let's start with the obvious question. Why were the British making promises about other people's countries? The short answer: empire is one hell of a drug. This was World War I, and the British were making lots of promises. In addition to promising a Jewish homeland's letter, British troops took Palestine, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. The people who lived there were Arabs, mostly Muslims, but there were Christian and Jewish minorities too. There was also a tiny number of European Jews who in the late 1800s had started building small colonies there. At a time when many Jews were suffering horrific persecution in Europe, they felt Palestine could be an escape. The idea of built by 1 year. Okay, so that is a lot of history, but it's important because the Zionist movement is a critical part of the story going forward, especially after it found a friend in the British government, where a lot of high-ranking officials supported Zionism, sometimes for unexpected reasons. Prime Minister Lloyd George, for example, was a Christian zealot who believed gathering the Jewish people in Palestine would bring Jesus Christ back to earth. Others, like Balfour, believed that getting the Jewish people out of Europe and into their own country would be a good thing. Herzl was pretty visionary when he wrote that the anti-Semitic nations will become our allies. Meanwhile, the Zionists assured Britain that their future country would be a reliable ally. So that's the backstory of how European anti-Semitism, Zionism, and British imperialism all led to the Balfour Declaration, this British promise to build a homeland for Jews in Palestine. Now we're going to look at how Britain did that. World War I had been a conflict between rival, and Balfour wrote to one of his colleagues,
For in Palestine we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country.
Instead, it was the Zionists who were consulted about what their vision for Palestine was, and so the mandate ended up incorporating not just the Balfour Declaration, but several clauses requiring Britain to ensure the establishment of a Jewish home in Palestine. British rule was very accommodating to the Zionist project, the other people. In 1936, they went on strike. British forces tried to break the strike with arrests, torture, mass punishment, and executions. Leaders were exiled, weapons confiscated, and houses blown up. Palestinian fighters attacked British and Jewish targets, while British and Haganah forces would carry out joint raids on Palestinian villages, some of the land. Under Ben-Gurion's leadership, the Jewish Agency was pretty much functioning as a government for the Jewish community. And the Zionist militias had tens of thousands of soldiers, modern weapons, and officers who'd already fought in World War II. On the other side, the Palestinians hadn't been allowed to develop their own administration or military. But as they waited for the UN solution, they were still the majority all over the country. In November 1947, the UN, then only made up of a fraction of the world's countries, voted to partition Palestine. This plan marked off 55% of the country for a Jewish state, but the UN never explained how it could be a Jewish state when half the people in its territory were Palestinian. To nobody's surprise, Palestinians, and in fact all Arabs, rejected the UN's plan. Ben-Gurion and the Zionist leadership accepted, but they saw an opportunity. With the British on the way out, the Zionists knew they would have the strongest military in Palestine. Their forces were instructed to seize more territory than they deemed, set off panic all over the country. As news spread, people fled, fearing they would be next. Historians have recorded dozens of similar massacres during this period. Each time, they would result in entire communities fleeing.
תמיד הייתה הוראה של בן גוריון לגרש את האנשים משם. כבשנו את המקום, טרקטורים חרשו את המקום. חרשו. לא נשאר זכר של כפר. למה? לא רצו שתהיה, לא חזרה ולא זכר של המקום.
By the time Britain had taken over by the new Israeli state and given to Jews. By the time the UN secured an armistice, 3/4 of the Palestinian people had become refugees. In Arabic, they call this the Nakba, literally the catastrophe. The new state of Israel made up 78% of what had been Palestine. The remaining parts were annexed by Jordan or taken over by Egypt. A year later, the UN passed a resolution calling for all Palestinian refugees to be allowed to return home. They never have been. Palestine had been erased. In the decades since, attempts to resolve this conflict have again tried to partition the land. With each successive attempt, the territory offered to Palestinians in their historic homeland shrinks even more. Ironically, Israel is still struggling to maintain the population advantage it gained in 1948 when it forced all those people out, because in 1967, it occupied the West Bank and Gaza, bringing all the Palestinians living there under its rule. And so today, the population of Jews and non-Jews in this land is roughly equal. But those living under occupation have no rights, no citizenship, and no prospect of independence. The Nakba-era tactics of settlement, home demolitions, and expulsion are still used against them.
Nakba, Nakba, no! We want Nakba, Nakba, no!
Israel has taken the land but wants nothing to do with the millions under its rule. International, Israeli, and Palestinian human rights groups say this system is a form of apartheid. To see if that's an accurate...
Netanyahu's only goal has been to set the region on fire. The entire world should realize this. He's lost the PR war, he's lost the legal war, and he's losing the military war. And his only chances of survival is to drag America into a direct confrontation with Iran. This is a fundamental threat to world peace. Everyone should be hoping for his downfall. I first met Netanyahu as an opposition leader in 2000. At that time, he had just basically one pitch, and that was Iran is the enemy and Hamas and Hezbollah are just its aircraft carriers. So a central leitmotif of Netanyahu's policy, apart from doing everything he can to stop the creation of a Palestinian state, is to get America into an attack on Iran.
For Iran, Israel is first, America is next. So when Israel fights Hamas, we're fighting Iran. When we fight Hezbollah, we're fighting Iran.
A war against Hezbollah is regarded as a matter of when, not if. If Israel has failed in its primary objective to dismantle Hamas after 10 months of unleashing more bombs on Gaza than the Allies dropped on Dresden and Hamburg in the Second World War, how on earth does it think it will unseat or push Hezbollah back? Hezbollah is much better armed than Hamas, with very accurate missiles that can sneak under the Iron Dome system. So the whole of Israel is vulnerable to a regional war on 5 fronts. This is fundamentally against all Western interests, particularly after a series of defeats for Western policy in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya. American foreign policy has basically labored under a huge self-imposed burden. They have been trying to persuade Netanyahu to stop the war, but they provided no incentive for Netanyahu to stop the war. And it still remains a bipartisan policy of whatever happens in the Middle East, however badly Israel has behaved, we are going to support Israel, which not even Ronald Reagan or H.W. Bush, two Republican presidents, allowed themselves to work under. If you remember, Reagan stopped Yitzhak Shamir from bombing West Beirut in 1982 because the scenes of the nightly bombing were so grim on CNN that Reagan, as the sort of consummate television frontman, said, "No, I don't want it. Stop it." And he stopped it. He stopped the shelling within 20 minutes. H.W. Bush threatened to cut aid off for every settlement that was announced. So now you've got a president in Joe Biden who is an instinctive Zionist, a generational Zionist, who is given far more leeway to Israel, committing far more barbaric crimes over a much longer period of time, and just giving it the green light. For Biden now to say, stop, 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 is also an incredibly weak position, because he could have said everything he's saying 10 months ago. Nothing has been achieved except the deaths of 40,000 Palestinians, 100,000 wounded, and even that could be a huge underestimate. And it is in US policy's interest to deconflict the Middle East. Their interest is in withdrawal, to confront China in the China Sea. So all of this is absolutely against America's interest. And yet its default position is we've got to protect Israel. Israel has to have the arms it needs. So it is fighting against its own policy. There's no coherence in American foreign policy. The one obstacle to the deal is not the Israeli negotiators, not the Israeli deep state, not even the Israeli army. It's Netanyahu himself, because he fears his government could break up. As soon as the war ends, this king risks being deposed. After 10 long months, we've had some quite threatening and key statements from Netanyahu's point of view. The first was his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, saying that Israel could not achieve its objectives militarily. That's his own defense minister. And now you've got Biden himself and the US saying Hamas can't be defeated militarily. Its tunnel network was much more extensive than they thought. The only way of getting the remaining 115 live hostages out is through negotiation. And he doesn't have any trophies for this war. Mohammed Deif is still alive, according to top Hamas officials, who's directly responsible for the October 7th attack. And he hasn't killed Yahya Sinwar, who is now the new leader of Hamas. Gaza and Hamas and the resistance movement are very, very much alive and still capable of firing missiles at Tel Aviv. After 10 months, the one senior figure in Hamas that Israel has killed is Ismail Haniyeh. Ismail Haniyeh wasn't hiding in any tunnel. He was openly operating in Tehran as a spokesman and as a diplomat for Hamas. And it was the clearest indication that Israel was not interested in real peace talks and negotiations by basically killing the chief negotiator. And they didn't just kill Haniyeh. Before that, they'd killed 60 members of his family, his sons and grandsons. That act basically tore up negotiations and any thought of returning the hostages alive. Because one of the big tensions in Israel is that, incredulously, Netanyahu's policy on the hostages was that it is only because of our military pressure that Hamas will surrender the hostages. It's exactly the opposite way around. The main killer of hostages by far has been the Israeli army bombing itself. Even 3 hostages which were trying to surrender got gunned down by Israeli soldiers. But the only way of getting the remaining hostages back is through peace and through negotiations with Hamas. It basically demonstrates the total folly, stupidity of Netanyahu's thinking, which is all about tactical strikes. It's not about the day after. Firstly, you can't decapitate an organization like Hamas or Hezbollah. So every time you kill one person, 2 or 3 people will step up. It's a proven system that keeps the organization funding. If you take out the leader, you do not take out the organization. So that's mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, it is an open provocation and an escalation. And they know that. So Israel escalates, and then the rest of the world says, oh, no, don't reply to it. The chief of staff of Hassan Nasrallah was also killed in a related attack. Iran and Hezbollah have both said they will avenge the deaths. I think Iran has got Israel over a barrel because it has vowed revenge. Israel doesn't know where that wave of missiles is going to come from. Is it going to come from all 5 fronts simultaneously? And you've got this enormous pressure on Netanyahu himself now from a Western alliance that backed him, but now has basically had enough and wants the whole thing to come to an end tomorrow. And also, most importantly, one of the war aims was to push Palestinians into the sea. If the war has been won by anyone, it's been won by the people of Gaza, not Hamas, but the people of Gaza, saying, yeah, we're going to die here rather than repeat the mistakes of 1948 or 1967. Netanyahu had a plan to thin out the population of Gaza and tasked his right-hand man, Ron Dermer, with a plan for executing that. And it's clear from the bombing and from the pattern of strikes that the target wasn't Hamas, it was all the people of Gaza. And that was a fundamental strategic error. And it made the war an existential war for all Palestinians everywhere, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank too. Israel has really damaged itself in this war. It's under huge pressure now, basically just to wave the white flag. Well, I would argue that Netanyahu isn't just a threat to the region, but he's a threat to Israel itself. Before this war, Israel had and has total dominance between the river and the sea, but Netanyahu wanted it all. This is the classic mistake of all colonial powers. Napoleon made it, Hitler made it as well. Both thought that they could crown their military dominance of Western Europe by attacking Russia. And this is a classic case of colonial imperial overreach. The clearest historical precedent to what he is doing in Israel is Algeria under French colonial rule. They were the dominant power, the colon, and they went too far. So in trying to seize all, France lost Algeria in its entirety. And this could be the position of Netanyahu in Israel today. Another example is South Africa. Before the apartheid regime made its peace with the African National Congress and realized that they had to fundamentally undo everything they were trying to do, they were busy setting fire to the whole region, to Botswana, to all the frontline states. They had wars, they had coups, and I think it's no accident that regimes that are on the verge of collapse are at their most violent, and that is the case with Israel today. Double Down and organizations like the Middle East Eye are giving you the news that the mainstream media have utterly failed to give you, particularly on Gaza. You read it first here. You don't read it first listening to the BBC or reading The Guardian or reading the New York Times. Support Double Down News on Patreon and read Middle East Eye.
दोस्तों, क्या आप जानते हैं कि इस दुनिया की सबसे ताकतवर कौम कौन सी थी? तो चलिए बताते हैं। अल्लाह ताला ने कुरान पाक के अंदर एक कौम का जिक्र फरमाया जिनके बारे में कहा जाता है कि ना इनसे पहले कोई इतना ताकतवर था और ना ही उनके बाद उन जैसी ताकत किसी को मिली। इस कौम को कौम आद कहा जाता है। ये कौम इतनी ताकतवर थी कि बड़े से बड़ा पत्थर जिसको कई आदमी मिलकर भी ना उठा सके, इनका एक आदमी एक हाथ से इस पत्थर को उठाकर फेंक देता था। इनके कद 60 हाथ लंबे होते थे। अल्लाह ताला ने हजरत हूद अलैहिस्सलाम को इनकी तरफ नबी बनाकर भेजा। हजरत हूद अलैहिस्सलाम ने इन्हें अज़ाबे इलाही से डराया, मगर ताकत के नशे में उन्होंने हूद अलैहिस्सलाम से कहा कि इस पूरी दुनिया में हमसे ताकतवर कोई नहीं। जब कौम आद की नाफरमानी हद से बढ़ गई तो अल्लाह ताला ने एक सिया बादल आजाब की शक्ल में भेजा। इस बादल में इस कदर तेज हवा थी जिसने इन्हें उठा कर जमीन पर मारा, जिससे इनके सर एक दूसरे से टकराते और फट जाते। इस तरह कौम आद हलाक हो गई।
नाज़रीन, बहुत बड़ी खबर यह सामने आ रही है कि मुज़ाकरात फेल हो गए हैं। ऑफिशियली कायरा में होने वाली मीटिंग्स और वहां पर होने वाले मुज़ाकरात ऑफिशियली इख्तिताम पजीर हो गए हैं, बेनतीजा खत्म हो गए हैं। तो उसके साथ ही अब किसी भी लम्हे ईरान हमला करने जा रहा है। इसका सबसे बड़ा जो सबूत सामने आ रहा है, और खित्ते में इस वक्त कशीदगी बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ गई है। अमेरिका के दोनों एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर इस वक्त ईरान के साहिलों के ऊपर पहुंच गए हैं। ये अब तक की सबसे बड़ी खबर है। नेवी का सबसे बड़ा हथियार एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर समझा जाता है, और अगर कोई एक भी एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर एक जगह से दूसरी जगह, एक रीजन से दूसरी जगह मूव होता है तो दुनिया में हलचल मच जाती है कि ये क्या हो रहा है। मतलब अगर एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर मूव हो रहा है, न्यूक्लियर पावर्ड एयरक्राफ्ट, उसके साथ जंगी बेड़े, जंगी जहाज, तो इसका मतलब कुछ ना कुछ होने जा रहा है। और अगर किसी मुल्क के साहिल के ऊपर 2 एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर आकर खड़े हो जाएं तो इससे ज्यादा कोई संगीन बात हो नहीं सकती। مطلب یہ کافی ہے اتنا بات کرنا کہ یہاں پر ایک براہ راست جنگ ہونے جا رہی ہے. اگر ایئر کرافٹ کیریئر کسی ریجن میں بھی آ جائے نا تو اس ریجن میں کھلبلی مچ جاتی ہے کہ یہاں پر اب کیا ہونے جا رہا ہے. تو 2 ایئر کرافٹ، ایک بھی نہیں، دونوں جو اس وقت مڈل ایسٹ میں آئے ہیں وہ دونوں کے دونوں امریکہ نے ایران کے ساحل کے اوپر ڈپلائی کر دیے ہیں. اس سے زیادہ کوئی خطرناک اور سنجیدہ بات جو ہے وہ ہو نہیں سکتی ہے. تو اس بارے میں آپ کو تفصیلی بتاتے ہیں کہ اب مذاکرات تو فیل ہو گئے ہیں، تو اب آگے کیا ہونے جا رہا ہے. اسی درمیان ہیکرز نے بہت سارا ڈیٹا اسرائیل کا ہیک کیا ہے، بہت ساری سینسٹیو انفارمیشن، بہت ساری انٹیلیجنس انفارمیشن جس کو ٹیلی گرام کے اوپر ڈالا ہے، اور جو ٹیلی گرام کے سی او ہیں ان کو فرانس نے گرفتار کر لیا ہے، خط لگائے جا رہے ہیں. اس وقت میں آپ کے سامنے 3 ہیڈ لائنز رکھنے جا رہا ہوں. القسام بریگیڈ رپورٹ کر رہا ہے we detonated a previously bobby trapped tunnel in the ambush targeting a force of 5 soldiers. 5 اسرائیلی فوجیوں کو ایک ٹنل کے گھات میں مارا گیا. پھر انہوں نے ایک ٹائٹ ایمبوش لگایا ہے خان یونس میں ایک بلڈنگ کے اندر، اور پھر یہاں پر جو اینٹی پرسونل شیل ہے وہ فائر کر کے اسرائیلی فوجیوں کو مارا ہے. پھر the explosion of the tank led to its direct injury and the deaths and injuries of its crew. ایک ٹینک کو اس طرح سے تباہ کیا گیا کہ اس کے اندر موجود 3 4 5 جتنے بھی فوجی تھے وہ ہلاک اور زخمی ہوئے. عمومی طور پر اگر ٹینک کو نشانہ بنایا جائے تو ضروری نہیں ہے کہ اس کے اندر بیٹھے ہوئے فوجی بھی زخمی ہوں یا مارے جائیں. ٹینک کو سم ٹائم ڈیمیج ہوتا ہے، سم ٹائم وہ کمپلیٹ ڈسٹرائے ہوتا ہے اور اندر والے فوجیوں کو بھی نقصان پہنچتا ہے. تو اس میں اندر جو بیٹھے ہوئے فوجی ہیں ان کو بھی نقصان پہنچا ہے، وہ مارے گئے. کہا کہ نتنیاہو has given us forever wars. ہمیں چھوڑ دیا ہے نتنیاہو نے forever wars کے اندر ایک مستقل چلتی ہوئی جنگیں. اسرائیل اس سے کیسے سروائیو کرے گا یہ سمجھ سے بالا تر ہے. اب آخر میں ایک بہت بڑا فینومنا جو اس وقت ہو رہا ہے، ٹیلی گرام کے سی او اسرائیلی ڈیٹا. اسرائیل ٹرائز ٹو سینسر دا انٹرنیٹ. اینٹی اسرائیل ہیکرز stole troves of sensitive Israeli data and are now publishing gigabytes of secret and classified information. Unable to stop the hacks, Israel is waging a futile war to against the leaks. اب انہوں نے گیگا بائٹس، کئی گیگا بائٹس کے اندر یہ ڈیٹا تھا اور اس کو پبلش کرنا شروع کر دیا اینٹی اسرائیلی ہیکرز نے ٹیلی گرام کے اوپر. اور وہ مطلب انفارمیشن ایران تک بھی پہنچی ہے، باقی سب تک بھی پہنچی ہے. بہت سینسٹیو ڈیٹا تھا، ٹھیک ہے. وہ have changed in a way that does not serve the Zionist entity. جو اسٹریٹجک ایکویشن ہے وہ اس وقت پوری طرح سے بدل چکی ہے، ٹھیک ہے. تو یہ ایران کی اسٹیٹمنٹ ہے. اسی درمیان ناظرین آگے چلتے ہیں تو ایران کے جو صدر ہیں وہ اپنا پہلا دورہ عراق کا کرنے جا رہے ہیں. غیر معمولی نوعیت کا یہ دورہ ہے، یعنی ایرانی صدر اپنا پہلا ہی دورہ عراق کا کرنے جا رہے ہیں. کوئی بھی جو ہیڈ آف دا گورنمنٹ ہوتا ہے بڑے ملکوں کا، وہ کس ملک کا پہلا دورہ کرتا ہے یہ بہت اہمیت رکھتا ہے، کیونکہ پہلا دورہ آپ کو بتاتا ہے کہ اس کنٹری کے لیے سب سے امپورٹنٹ کنٹری کون سا ہے.
یونیورسل ٹیلی ویژن کو سبسکرائب کرنا نہ بھولیں، اس کے بعد بیل بٹن پہ کلک کریں اور اپنے کامنٹس کے سیکشن میں اپنے قیمتی جو خیالات کا اظہار ضرور